Okay. طيب. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Good afternoon. This is the last but not the least scientific session of this wonderful conference. And I just want to remind you that usually those who stay up until the last lobe of the race, they are the winners. So congratulate you for staying up to this time. I know it is hard for people to keep their attention up to this time in the afternoon since morning. But believe me, usually the fruitful things get at the end of any event. We have in this fine session, we have 3 speakers, distinguished speakers, and we have a good amount of time for their presentations. Let me first introduce the first speaker, then my colleague, Dr. Hassan al-Zahrani, will inshallah present the second one. The first speaker, Professor Gary Sayed. Professor Gary is a professor of health sciences at California State University, Mengen Health, and he previously served as a professor of radiology at Al Faisal University College of Medicine in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and clinical professor of diagnostic imaging at Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia. His vast academic leadership experience includes chairman of Department of Diagnostic Imaging at Thomas Jefferson University, dean at both California State University Dominguez Health and Charles Drew University of Medicine and Science, and provost and senior vice president of academic affairs at the University of Science in Philadelphia. Professor Gary, a distinguished fellow of the American College of Nuclear Medicine and past president of the American Board of Science in Nuclear Medicine. I'm sure Professor Gary will talk about another important topic, the academic leadership, and it's a continuation of the previous session. Please, Professor Gary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, for the kind introduction. Assalamu alaikum. It is a pleasure to be with all of you this morning, I should say this evening where you're at. Thank you for allowing me to be part of your conference and present to you. I am delighted to have joined you, and my heartiest congratulations to your society and all of its leadership for your 20th anniversary. I wish you all the best in your future. I have intentionally kept the title of this presentation as generic as possible so that I could gauge its content better to the interest of the audience as I listen to my colleagues present their parts. And I did just that. So while the broad title given was academic leadership, I will focus a little bit on leading change. And I must thank the previous speaker, Professor Al-Shari, for setting the stage for this presentation very nicely. He's done a wonderful job in outlining what a leader should be looking at the 40,000 foot level. So what I would like to do now is present to you perhaps a mini sequel, if I may call it that, and bring you down to 10,000 feet And in doing so, I'd like to preface my presentation by saying it is targeted more towards those colleagues, junior colleagues, who either would like to be, or the present leaders, whether you're a dean or a provost and wish to, or a provost is what you call a rector in Saudi Arabia, wishes to talk or encourage junior colleagues to assume leadership roles. Always remember, leadership is about persuasion. So it is the leader's job to persuade colleagues to do what needs to be done. So this is for aspiring junior leaders who wish to become or are expected to become department chairs or college deans. So in academic settings, a leader plays multiple roles, all the way from being the key person running the entire show, but always keeps an eye at the core and center of his radar screen, because he or she is brought to this shop for a specific purpose in addition to leading that shop. And that specific purpose typically entails some sort of a transition, a change from where the shop is, whether that shop is a clinical department or an academic unit or an entire college. The leader transforms that shop from where it's at to some desired future state. That involves a journey. And the guide in this journey is the change leader. I found out in my 30 years of academic leadership that this part of academic leadership is by far one of the most difficult tasks. It's almost like moving a mountain. But yes, moving a mountain is possible, one piece at a time. So in academia, this moving the mountain challenge has yet an added layer to it that makes it even more complex, in that we have colleagues who are the team members that we are supposed to be articulating with and leading towards achieving towards a future state, are highly critical, very smart, analytical people. So they will question every move. And you have to have the reason behind everything you say and possess the art of balancing content with the process and the interest of the people as you pursue your goal in leading that transition. Now, I tend to think of this as a wheel that constantly turns and should never stop. The rate at which the RPM may change, but you certainly don't want it to stop. So when you come in as an academic leader, you are tasked to envision a strategy that leads your shop to a new desired place. So invariably, virtually every incoming leader, one of the first things they do is develop a strategic plan that informs the team and the shop where that shop will be at in whatever period that strategic plan was developed for, 3, 5, maybe 50 years down the road. That means you come in with a distinct mission assigned to you. A good academic leader does not rewrite the mission. The mission of the place is what you are entrusted with. So your vision has to be mission-centered and mission-focused. And Professor Al-Shari gave an outstanding counter this with the two superb examples he shared with you earlier, where he gave an example of a president of a university who opted to transform a teaching-focused institution into a research-extensive place. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Any incoming university rector or president or chancellor or provost would love to do that. But you have to be cognizant of the timing part of it. His temporal alignment did not work out, so he was operating outside of the scope of the mission. And he also shared an example of a dean of a medical college in developing his or her staff in furthering the mission of the college. So whatever vision, the V part of this acronym, that you come in with, that's your RNA for this DNA. Your mission is your DNA. You don't change the DNA. You come in with your RNA that you transcribed from the DNA, from the mission. And now you're saying, based on this mission, this is my way, my thinking, that we can achieve this mission and go from point A to point B, for which you develop your goals and measurable objectives. This is not about strategic planning, so I'm not going to talk about any of that matter, but always keep it in mind, because that is the building block. Then once you do that, you started turning the wheel. And that turning began when you set up your team to develop the strategic plan. So you organize your group and you put together in place what is a resemblance of a team to get started, now that you have the nucleus. In order for you to move forward, though, you have to be always crystal clear in conveying the message. Each and every step of this wheel that you see in front of you requires articulating that vision very clearly in order for you to be able to lead your vision to fruition. So you have to know what the weak links in this wheel are. You have to know what the processes are, and you have to know the chain of command. You have to know what the quality factors, temporal factors, so you don't end up being another example like the president of the university that was presented earlier, or the dean of the college that was exemplified. Make sure your temporal alignment checks out. Then obviously a good leader always thinks about efficiency factors. Now that you have put in the building blocks, you have to think about your human factor. And your human factor cannot be understated. So always think of and remain cognizant of the old adage: change is good unless it happens to you. And you, in this case, is your team, your people, your human factor in your organization or in your college or department. These are your colleagues. You're trying to motivate to buy into your vision. So always articulate your vision, and keep in mind, you're the salesperson. If you don't sell your vision, it's just in your head. So now you are tackling a very complex challenge that we all as leaders face, as inertia. That's what we call the institutional culture. You're about to change culture. What is culture? Simply put, in this business, when we say culture, we're talking about how things get done. So you come in and your team tells you, this is how we get things done. And you say, we can do it better, more efficient, more whatever that more is. is your vision, and you want to take it from how it's done now to how it should be done. So now that you want to change that culture, you have to be very clear who these players are and how you motivate them to move them to the next level so that you have the resemblance of a credible team and bring them to the pivoting point. This is where the rubber hits the road and you're actually about to start your journey. Once you bring them to your pivoting point, bring your team to this pivoting point, and your team is doing the work, your energy should focus on sustaining that forward momentum. Because the minute you take your eyes off of this and you don't keep track of the process you have put in place, things can unravel rather quickly. A successful change leader knows what to articulate at what point in preparation for the next move-in cycle to motivate the team. At this point in time, you are cashing in your balance out of the goodwill, give them the benefit of the doubt, balance you came in with as leader to your shop. Unless you replenish that balance account, pretty soon you deplete it and your words will not have credence to them, and your team will not resonate with what you say. So a successful change leader, in motivating his or her team, and also in reporting to higher ups, to your boss, for example, would not count and say, oh, we brought in 10 consultants who said we should do this, or we signed 5 MOUs with Harvard and Oxford. Harvard is Harvard, and it will always be in Cambridge. You're in charge of your shop. You would not, he or she would not count how many people he or she sent to conferences or workshops, or how many team members published how many conference papers, or how many courses they added to the calendar. Those are not your motivating factors. You're just stating the fact they know it, they've seen it. What you focus on is what came out of all of that. What has changed in the landscape as a result of all of that? That's your outcome. That's what you will be measuring in the next turn that you should be preparing your team for. So you have to not only know what you need to measure, so you don't get your inputs mixed up with your outputs, but you're using it to motivate your team to move forward and keep this momentum going. Otherwise, it can unravel, and your team members start wandering off, and you will lose focus of your team member, not necessarily yours, but your team members' focus, and they take their eye off the ball. You need to keep them focused all the time in order to move forward. That being said, the change you come in as a new leader is also your fingerprint. The change you lead is your differentiating brand. You know, everyone has a brand. Companies have brands. You as a leader have a brand. And you, if you want to become a leader, you want to have a brand. What do you want to be known for? What distinguishes you as a Dean of Medicine at University X from the Dean of Medicine at University Y? And therefore, the College of Medicine at University X is known for ABC that College of Medicine at University Y does not have. What is your brand? So you have to know what that point of differentiation is. And that's what delivers this result. And that result is what makes and contributes to your brand. So at the end of the cycle, these feed into each other. With respect to teamwork, know as you approach this pivoting point, know where your your resistance points are, because that is your pitfall, and you don't want you or your team fall through that. Know who the ghost players are. In every shop you walk into, there are the informal leaders. Who are they? They're the influencers. What is the extent of their influence? And to what extent can they impede the change you are about to bring in? As you manage that, you now are in the first stage of cultural shift. Remember, the way how things get done there. Then you are operating here on this side, dealing successfully with those ghosts and others in the organization. Now you are at the first stage of that differentiation you're looking for. What makes your College of Medicine different than this one? So there are about 60 or so colleges of medicine in Saudi Arabia. What is the College of Medicine at University A is known for from all the others, and it's attested to being the leader in ABC, whatever those ABCs are. As you institute and achieve those, you institutionalize and achieve those brand differentiations that become the place's attribute, you become the pilot who becomes known for achieving that result. Then the aspiring who are interested in that type of transitions are the ones that seek your brand. Here, it is key for you as a leader to dial down, to resist the temptation to lead by extortion. A lot of novice leaders fall victim to leading by extortion. And what do I mean by that? So let me give you an example. You would go to a colleague, you want him to, a team member do ABC for you. You say, oh, you asked for Thursday off. I'll give you Thursday off if you could finish this by tomorrow. Now you took your colleague hostage for Thursday off, and you want a ransom that is finish this by tomorrow. Whatever this is, that's your ransom in order to release that hostage. This dynamic is called leadership by extortion. Another example to illustrate this, and we'll move on, would be like you go to a colleague who came, ask you, maybe pay for me to go to this conference in Abha in medical education, and you say, if you'd like to go to the conference in Abha, there are two things I'd like you to do before you go. I'd like to volunteer to do XYZ. Now the conference is the hostage, and doing XYZ is the ransom. You're asking for a ransom to free that hostage. And that's called leadership by extortion. And at this point, you're dealing with culture. You need to resist that type of leadership and bring in the positive leadership that would look at this request to go to the conference as integral part of that vision and that change and say yes. Or better yet, you would be the one who knows his team and say, you know what, you're a good member of our team to go to the conference, CIMIC conference in Abha, and bring us the latest and newest and smartest way of doing this. You boost their confidence, you win their loyalty, and you did not take a hostage. So the way you approach what gets done and the way you present it, whether it is in enabling or delegating or extending a privilege or demanding a responsible outcome, you try to always relate it to your vision, the purpose, and in a positive form where you avoid disengagement and disenfranchisement. Last thing you want to do is lose your team members. And remember, this is harder to overcome. And when I say it's harder, it's based on my own personal 30-plus year experience, because our colleagues are inherently highly skilled, highly trained, analytical people. So let me walk you through a quick example to illustrate my case. And these are a few examples, some I lived through personally, some I witnessed, some I read about. So back when I used to work at Thomas Jefferson University, a chairman of a department came in named Rothman, and his vision was to make the orthopedic surgery department the best in the United States. Now, there are hundreds of orthopedic departments in the United States. Every leader would like his or her shop to become the marquee. You know, the marquee is the top. Like a marquee car would be Mercedes. That's the brand they established for themselves. You want to take your Camry or Accord to a Mercedes. It's a long journey. If you define the extent and parameters of your change and you know what that change is, that's what we call your delta. Then you develop the steps and processes accordingly. And you keep turning that wheel consistently without losing steam, eventually you will hit your target. I always tell my junior colleagues after I give them, there's a nice book I recommend they read about how this process works. And think of Clark Kerr. When he became chancellor of UC Berkeley, it was not a big name school, just like any other university. He said in 50 years, Berkeley will be the name Harvard and MIT come to for consultation. He developed a 50-year-long vision and he achieved it. And today, Berkeley is a reference for Harvard. In fact, there is a nice book called University, an Owner's Manual. If you have time, I suggest you read it if you're interested in this business. It's written by the Dean of Harvard School. In it, he says, we train our students, give them their PhDs, train them, wait for Berkeley to hire them, vet them out, sort them out, and if they get tenure and promotion at Berkeley, then we hire them. We know they're good because Berkeley said they were good. That's the type of marquee status you achieve for your school or your shop. And today, fast forward 20 years past where Rothman stated his vision, yes, Jefferson Orthopedic always ranks as one of the top orthopedic departments in the United States. In many years, it's number one. It depends who does this ranking. If you're a fan of commercial ranking, in the United States, it's done by the US and World News. In Europe, it's done by the British, the higher education ranking. There's a Chinese one that's not any better than either of these two, but these are non-credible commercial rankings. I remember when I was dean at Drew and I was in Washington, D.C. at a conference, a colleague of mine came to me and said, "Hey, Gary, congratulations. You guys are one of the best, top second best residency in geriatric medicine." I said, "Thank you." After a while, he left, I called my office and said, "Do we have a residency in geriatric medicine?" I didn't know. No, we don't. So take these commercial rankings for whatever they are, but you need to keep in mind that what matters is your peers. That's the gold standard. When your peers say they're good, that means you achieved the vision. At a college level or a university level, there are plenty of examples too. A case I lived through was at the University of Findlay, where I started my academic career as an assistant professor. We had a dean, the late Luke Bartolomeo, who said, "We will take Findlay," who at that time Findlay had about 800 students and was just looking into what to do with itself, either change or close shop and just forget the 150-year history they had. So they decided to change. And his vision was to transform Findlay from the 800 tiny school to one of the biggest institutions in the state of Ohio and the most robust. 30 years later, we look back and Findlay grew from 800 to 5,000 students, and it is one of the most robust. That requires a leader who keeps that wheel turning. And Luke Bartolomeo did that until he died. He died doing his job for 30 years. A lot of universities in the United States do these types of, or pursue these types of changes to change their ranking. These are the official Carnegie ranking, not the US World News Magazine ranking. They usually would like to go from the M1, M2, or B1, B2 classification to R1, R2. In this case, R1 is higher than R2. A good example of that is the University of Southern California. They wanted to become an R1 university. In the 70s, that was their vision. The leadership came in and said, "We're going to transform this institution." University of Southern California goes by its acronym USC. USC stands for University of California. But in the 70s, a lot of people referred to them as the University of Silly Horses or the University of Spoiled Children, where a lot of rich people went and played sports all day long. They, through the incoming leader's vision, transformed that institution from a University of Silly Horses to highly respected, credible R1 institution. Achieving this delta requires a set of skills the leader needs to develop. And core to this is to maintain a skill set that allows the leader to read between the lines and go beyond what is in front of them. So we would like our work to be data-driven or evidence-based. So we have the evidence presented to us. I just constructed this hypothetically, this data you see in front of you, where hypothetically, let's say I am the person in charge and this is my institution's performance shown in grayscale. And in orange next to me are my peer institutions that I compete against. Then in blue, I have all the institutions. So let's say, hypothetically, this is Abha Medical College, and these are the peers, maybe King Abdulaziz and King Saud. Then these are all other medical colleges in Saudi. Hypothetically, you can apply that example if you wish. Or it could be your department. So you have some metrics. Here we have an arbitrarily laid out 4 metrics, G1, G2. These are goals 1, goal 2, goal 3, goal 4, the outcomes for those goals, the generic outcome based on the objectives that were measured. And you see this shop is doing fairly well and nicely across the board. If you are happy with this and you take this to your team and your leaders and say, look, we're doing real well, we're in good shape. And I would humbly argue you fell short and you undersold yourself and you undersold your team. Because a good leader reads between the lines. Peers into the data and look at what the data is missing, that what you're looking at is not telling you what the missing story. So if you look at this data set analytically and give it some thought, you find out that you have your institution versus your competition. There's a gap. And this is your competition's gap, meaning your competition would like to do as well as you do. And if you capitalize on that gap and make that distance greater, then you become more differentiated. Your brand becomes more widely recognized in whatever those tasks goals were. So you pierce into it. But that's not enough. Once you identify what you can do better, which is this exercise, then you should think about achieving a point is easy. If you really push your heart, you get there. The difficult part is maintaining that point. It's always easier to become number one, but staying number one is not easy. So you have to ask yourself, what are the gaps within my work? And here, if you look at how everyone is doing, then project that back, you will see the gaps that lead you to opportunities you didn't know. As you go through this with your team, there will always be a lot of talk. You as a leader should know what part of that talk is signal and what is noise, and be able to subtract the noise out of the talk. Otherwise, you could easily get burned out and overwhelmed by the process. Always keep an eye on your signal to noise ratio and take care of yourself first. If you're not in good shape, you're not going to be able to lead anyone. Be able to distinguish between the individuals, the players, and their dynamics versus your organization that you are leading. Now, what are the big pitfalls? We don't have time to go over all of them. I will share a couple with you. First and foremost is not having a clear vision and communicating, more importantly, selling that to your team. If you come in and you don't have a vision, you don't know where you're going. And if you don't know where you're going, you can lead your people to go wherever it is that shop needs to go to. The second, this is the cancer of this business, is under-communicating your vision. You can never under-communicate. You need to employ these communicative skills in as many ways as you can. And Professor Al-Shihri alluded to a very nice example where he called colleagues he hadn't heard from out of the blue to share a story with. If you were the leader, you would employ those type of tactics to get the buy-in. Without the buy-in, you get nowhere at all. And always avoid making ad hoc decisions. Never make a decision on the spot, and never reply to an email as soon as you receive it. Sleep over it, think about it. In fact, for those of you who are not in tune with how you make your decision, I would highly suggest you read a book called Decision Traps, and Professor Al-Shihri translated that to Arabic. It's a classical book. I studied it about 30 years ago. It is one of the best books you could read if you haven't read it. So what skills do you need? This is what this presentation was about, and I hope the examples kind of open some windows. What we did was I took you to in front of the speakers before me, took you in front of a humongous, large, palatial house. And each one of them described this house from their perspective that we call leadership. I opened a single window and gave you a view of that house through that single window. But remember, it's a palatial house. So what do you need to be able to grasp the entire view just from the window that I opened for you? You have to have people skills. You should be able to deal with your team members diplomatically. Diplomacy cannot be understated for leadership.
4
You have to
minutes.
know how to deal with individuals versus groups. Know you're communicating media and communication modes, but be able to listen. Listen more than you talk. Have your analytical skills developed, and I showed you a couple of examples. Know your systemic skills. If you don't keep your eye on the whole picture, parts of it could fall off and you don't know. And in healthcare, which is inherently a changing business all the time, you have to keep track of that change in dynamics as well.
3 minutes
I
left.
hope this gave you a quick overview of what all of this entails. I thank you for your attention. This is my contact information. If any thoughts or follow-up questions come up, feel free to get in touch with me. I thank you for the opportunity and for allowing me to be part of your impressive conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gary. It was really an excellent talk.